All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. I've been working on this sermon series for quite a while, so I appreciate you all participating in this. As I've been telling people about my work, I realize that we have a lot of co-workers here at this church, and part of what my thesis is that we can engage in topics of social justice by singing together, but also I think that the church is better positioned to talk about these tough issues when we do so collaboratively, when it's not just the pastor dispelling God's wisdom upon everybody, but rather realizing that we're all really colleagues in ministry together. So I thought that both for this sermon series, which is on the election, and the next sermon series that we have this week on the topic of healthcare, that we can lean on the wisdom of some of our own. So I would like to open this up with a quick word of prayer and also a word of gratitude for each of you all for being here today. I know there are a couple other poll workers that we have that were unable to be here today. I know
Marge
Cromer is traveling, and there are others. So let's just bow our heads with it. Bob McClellan. Emily Thompson. Anybody else? So let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. We pray for these poll workers, for these faithful colleagues in ministries as they do this sacred work. In these divisive and anxious times, help us who are the church, the body of Christ, be truth tellers, whether that truth is convenient or not. Help us to protect the truth and to serve our neighbors by making sure that everybody has the right to vote, whether they vote the way that we vote or not. So I give thanks for these leaders. I pray for our nation. We pray that there may be peace. We pray that as Election Day nears and we enter the interregnum period between Election Day and inauguration in January, that there would be a peaceful transfer of power. Help us to be neighborly towards one another. Help us to exist in these spaces, trusting that even if we disagree, that we are coming to the table in good faith. That in all things, gracious God, we each want to serve you faithfully to the best of our abilities. This we pray in the name of your resurrected Son, Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace. Amen. Amen. So friends, as I said, as we get closer to November 5th, I think that it's important that we be truth tellers when there is so much disinformation and misinformation about our election process. And I firmly believe that the church, we are called to be truth tellers. So I want to thank you all, Bill, Dan, Debbie, Rita, Pat, and Laura for being here. I would just have a couple questions for you all, and then just about how you all got involved in this work, what it means for you. Then I'm going to ask a little bit about what you wish more people knew about the process. I might ask you all if you have like a meaningful anecdote or story about something that happens to you or something that you saw. And then we're going to open it up to our guests here if you all have any questions about how our election works, our elections process works. So in no particular order, would one of you all like to start us off and just let us know, how did you get involved with this work? Somebody want to volunteer to start us off with that?
We just sort of go down the line.
Yeah, that's fine, Bill. And if we can all use our preacher voices.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm not worried about you, Bill. You got
Right.
So, Bill, how'd you get started?
So in 2020, you all will remember COVID and how that just sort of cast a pall over our country. And I was still practicing medicine at that time, wearing a mask and a shield in my office, and reading about how, the average age of the workers there is between 60 and 80. They're younger folks, but they're older people, and we were getting stories that some of those people, because they were at greatest risk of COVID, were not going to be participating. And I said, okay, well, I'm not afraid. I'm worried about COVID, but it's not going to keep me from doing what I do in the public. And so I volunteered and initially was wiping down tables. And I said to there's a site supervisor, and I said, I could do more here. And she just had enough people to do all the other things that you'll hear about today that we do, because there are a variety of different tasks that we have in each polling site. And finally, I asked to get transferred to another polling station where they needed, because I wanted to learn as much as I could about each of the tasks. And then in 2022, I became the site supervisor actually not until 2024. 2022, I was still learning. In this year in primaries, I started being a site supervisor. So, and Jim and Rita saw how crazy it was, how much there is to do, because you're responsible for everything and accountable for everything that goes on. So that's my story.
Dan, how about you?
Actually, I spent most of my life doing, I guess, what I call hammer ministry. Just doing home repairs for people who are in need, traveling to disasters for repairing homes and things. But I kind of got to the point where I really no longer keep up with that, and I just kind of was looking around, is there something I can still do to contribute? And I actually started in 2022 with the primaries in 2022, and I worked every election since then. And I'm so far just strictly working election day. That's as far as any kind of antidote, and probably most everybody here has had this happen to them. Someone says, I don't know some of these people, who would you recommend? And my stock answer is today, ask me tomorrow and I'll have an opinion. But today I have no opinion. I can't help you. But
we have to be Switzerland.
Yes,
for all of you who know that Switzerland is neutral and is a friend to all, and that's what we're Switzerland.
Absolutely.
You're a bunch of Swiss people up here, at least in the polls.
And when somebody comes up to the table to sign in and they have some comment about the process, you can neither agree nor disagree. Just let them say what they're going to say and move on.
Debbie, how about you?
I started thinking about my patriotic self in 2001, September 11th, following the Twin Towers, and I thought, I need to do something for my country. I really love my country. My son was in high school at the time. He said, Mom, I didn't know you were so patriotic. And I said, well, I am. So anyway, I was thinking about it, and finally I encountered a man named Paul Brown, who some of y'all might know, who is an election official, and we were volunteering at a swim meet, and he told me about how I could become an election worker. So approximately 2016 or 2017, I started doing that, and the chief judge at Page High School calls me and asks me if I'll serve at each election. So it's interesting. And the one thing I want to share about my service is one time I was stationed at the machine where you insert the ballot, and a gentleman would not leave because he said, I need to know that my vote is going to count. And I was at a loss as to how to explain that. I mean, I just said, your vote has gone into the machine accepted it, it didn't spit it back out. That's all I can say. Your vote will count. But as a voter, you can always go online and get your own voter record, and it shows every election that you voted in, on if you voted early or whatever. So everybody's vote is going to count if the machine accepts your ballot.
Right. We can get into the weeds of that later about why that machine works, but just think about the SATs, and it's a very similar sort of thing, because nobody can grade all the SATs, so they've got to have a machine, and that technology has worked out. But I can get into the weeds about how that actually works later, if you want.
Can I ask a question? Just, you said if the machine, why would the machine spit it back out?
It will spit it back out. For example, if you don't mark any choices, it'll say you have a blank ballot. If you leave one out, it'll say, did you mean to not vote in this race? It'll spit it back out, and you get the opportunity to redo it. Or if your ballot is illegible, your marks are not readable by the machine, it'll spit it back out, you can have a spoiled ballot and you get a chance to read it.
Like if you check rather than fill in the ovals.
So that will.
Or if you
Yeah.
can't color in the lines. And, again, as a neurologist, when I'm checking somebody in and they have a horrible tremor while they're signing their name, I will tell them, we've got a machine that is called an automark where you can put the ballot on in and then a touch screen to fill out each contest. And this is also great for people who have vision problems because you can blow up the screen so that they can read it. We also have headphones, so if they can't see at all, and it will read. So that we have a variety of different ways, and then the machine, once you hit vote, it marks every single one of those perfectly. And so
And then it spits your ballot back out, so
right.
you can now look at it and see that it did what you meant for it to do.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you. That really assures me.
Yeah.
Rita, how about you? How did you first stumble into this work?
Well, 2020, I had just retired and we had a pandemic. And I really do not remember who I spoke with or how I went about volunteering, but my first election was the 2020 election. And I've worked every one since except for a runoff that happened like in May. And it was because I was like, I'm not spending my time from 6 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. for 2 people.
Yeah. It was 16 people in our precinct. A long day.
But that was a conscientious choice on my part, not the best use of my time. I felt like they'd find someone else. But so that's, and I really enjoy it. I find, first of all, since I am retired now, I'm not a morning person. Like, I'm not a 6 a.m. morning person anymore. Like, you're there at 5:45. I mean, you're there. And that's not really my cup of tea anymore. And so I take my little mini refrigerator with all my food for the whole day with me. But it's just, the time goes really fast. And it's just so nice to see all the neighbors. I'm not working in the precinct where I vote, so I'm seeing different people. And I just love it. And, every time somebody said something about their interesting story, we all have so many interesting stories. But one time I had this gentleman come out with his ballot and he goes, "What's a libertarian?" And I'm just like, and I'm the school teacher in me. I'm like, break it down. And then I had typically, or the last election, I was the person who actually handed you your ballot and gave you instructions on how to fill it in. And again, being a former teacher and having to give those EOGs over and over and over again.
EOG?
End of grade test
End of grade.
in North Carolina.
They're also,
We have to bubble in.
yeah, they're bubbles.
And so this age demographic that would come in, I would just simply say, "You remember all of those Scantron sheets that you filled out when you were taking the SAT? Fill it out just like that." And they go, "Oh, okay," But if you want more stories, I got them.
Pat, how about you?
I started doing this in 2012 for the money. They pay you.
Where do you work? Yeah, we all do it.
I want to work at your poll.
It works out just above minimum wage, though.
Barely.
Oh, I
Yeah.
was gonna ask. So
Yeah.
you do get paid for this work?
Oh, yes.
It's $8 an
Yeah.
hour.
About $8 an hour.
$8 an
Yeah,
hour.
but we got a raise this year, but then we also had to go down and fill out all the forms, and now they're
So in
withholding.
other words, you're not paying the mortgage with this?
No,
It's
you
not
don't do it for the
even
paycheck.
No, I did it.
You might get a coffee.
I did it out of a sense of civic duty. I stressed to my kids, you got to vote. Part of the deal. You live here. But also out of curiosity of the process, just like what we're doing here, I wanted to find out what the inner workings were. And it's a good way to find out when you're doing it.
What about you, Laura?
In '96, I found my kids all in high school, and there's a piece of paper, a sign-up paper, as you go into the polling place, where you can sign up if you're interested in working. So I signed up. So that was in '96. By '98, I had gotten. Do they still do the class at GTCC?
No, not that I know of.
They do it downtown.
At that time, well, this is different from
Yeah.
what we do.
There was a class you could take for credit that allowed you to, they don't have that anymore.
Okay, I took that. It was a great class, and you get certified as a North Carolina voting official, so you can work anywhere in the state. So I did that. My first big election, well, not big, it was 98, I think it was a primary,
Midterm.
and then 2000 was when I started, and I feel old. And I did it because I love voting. I think it's fun. My story is very personal. It's kind of funny. When my kids were like 2, 3, and 5, I had to take them with me to vote. And we were at Page High School, and I had told them, we're going to vote. We're going to behave. And so we go in, and then they did. And so I marked my ballot, and as we're starting to leave, the oldest one just unraveled, totally disintegrated. And I said, what's wrong? When are we going boating? I want to in the boat. Because my dad had a fishing boat, and they thought that we were going to go boating. So, yeah, and I have worked on election day. I've been a chief judge and for early voting, a site supervisor, and I'm a registrar now, so any of the problem children come to me. So is anybody else a registrar?
I'm site supervisor, so I
So
do
you
it
have
all.
to do.
How many are early voting people and how many are same day or both?
I have worked early voting, not
But
this
right
year,
now you're
just the
Just
election.
November 5, November 5, November
Yeah,
5.
just-
Yeah, so Laura and I do both. You do both?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I ran,
and they're totally different rules for early voting and for same day voting.
I ran into Mary at Harris Teeter the other day,
Right.
and I asked her how you were doing, and she says, I have no idea. I have not seen Bill.
Yeah.
I know that you've been busy.
I work 56 hours from Monday through Saturday.
Wow.
But I did bring, and if I'm allowed later to get on my soapbox about fraud, this is just the voter ID instructions.
And it's like 18 pages or something, 17 pages.
And this, decorated by my grandchild, is the handbook. And we have to keep it with us, we don't have to know it.
105 pages.
And I have to tell you, my artistic, somewhat wicked children, on the back of one of my instruction books, not known to me, they make jokes about mom working the polls. So they had a pole dancer drawn on here. I didn't know it. And so I'm sitting there looking through my book and everybody's going, so we are poll workers. Of sorts.
I do want to mention one thing too, kind of at this point. There was a really good article in today's News Record about Tom Campbell had an
Yes.
article. And it's very interesting because he talks about what Governor Pat McCrory did when he lost his reelection bid by a very small margin, and his suspicions about the voting process and what he did about it. And it's really interesting. But then the rest of the article is all going through the nitty gritty of what transpires. It's an excellent article. I got a few copies here if anybody wants one who doesn't take the paper.
I'd like one.
If that's not enough, maybe my wife's in the office, maybe get some more
Yeah,
copies
we can
made.
make some copies.
But it's an excellent article, and the timing was just perfect for.
And to add one thing to that, it shows how excellent the system is run in North Carolina.
Right.
He talks about that, which is not the way it is in all states.
So many of y'all have already answered my next question, which was, what does being a poll worker mean to you personally, and how do you feel it impacts your community? I know, Debbie, you mentioned patriotism, September 11th, a feeling of wanting to contribute. Rita, you mentioned civic duty. Pat, you mentioned curiosity. You just want to learn more. Are there any other things that you would add to that list?
Yeah, for me, it's being able to make certain that every human being that comes in there is going to leave able to vote. And I mean everybody. Everybody. So
That's
and
able to vote in the
well, I'm going to give a couple of examples, but that's the early voting. come on election day, we are
Your hands are
very
tied.
much more constrained, okay? But
Vote early, people. Vote early.
right, and that's up till November 2nd, Saturday, November 2nd. If that ends early voting, but we can, for example, one of my things was I had 2 people who were houseless. Okay, and I was able to work it on through because they spent the majority of time in their son's house. So to get registered, you have to have a pictorial ID. They had pictorial IDs, and you have to have some proof of your registration or of your residence. And they assured me that they lived in their car, but they spent most of their time when they could, they're couch surfing, and they came from Cabarrus County and they're houseless right now. But that's an example. And then all sorts of different people from other countries where there's a language barrier, and most of them are smart enough to bring in somebody who can translate so that we can get on through that. So it's problem solving. It's several voters came in, they'd been purged from their rolls. Well, how do you get purged from the rolls? Usually it's by not voting in 2 elections, and you guys can check me if I'm wrong about this, not voting in 2 consecutive elections, and not answering the mail that you get from the Board of Elections. There may be other things, but when it's there, that voter denied, that's a hard stop. I can't issue a ballot at that point, but I can fix it. And so when I'm looking at the voter who's like, well, I vote, and they will tell you all sorts of things, and you said, well, I understand that, but there's a problem here, and the good news is I can fix it. And that's what they want to know. They just want to know that they're going to be able to vote that day and cast that vote in the machine if it's at all possible, and we make that possible. And that's why I'm doing it, and that's why I will continue to do it, is we can fix it. Now, there are some things we can't. The lady who was living in a hotel, and it had the address of her hotel was there, but for some reason we called the Board of Elections and said we can't use that. And I was just totally bummed because she had to cast what's called a provisional ballot. So a provisional ballot means you fill it out just the way everybody else does, but it doesn't go in the DS 200. It goes into a folder that goes downtown, and then the Board of Elections, which is a very partisan situation, you've got Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated. I'm not sure how many people, whether there are 5, there are 3 to 5 people who sit there and go through each provisional ballot for what criteria was missing, and we have ways to cure that. So if you don't have a license or a pictorial ID, and Laura showed you that there are tribal IDs, veterans IDs, your passport. There's just a whole different bunch of ways. But I can't accept a Costco card with a picture on it.
No, they can be.
Yeah.
That depends on your age.
Depends on your age.
They can-
Over 65. Go ahead.
It's
Debbie.
less than a year expired usually.
For the driver's license.
But if you're really old, there's another provision.
Right.
I forgot.
If you're over 65 and your license was in date at 65, it's forever. Okay, and the card you can get down at Board of Elections, and with I think fairly minimal less proof than we need, they can go on in and they will for free make you a pictorial ID that's good for 10 years. And so that's really my get out of jail card. I had a lady from Abbotswood. We had 2 busloads of people from Abbotswood. And we joke in medicine that there's a busload of epileptics out in the parking lot, and that's a joke, but this was not. And I knew this the night before, that we were going to have 2 busloads of folks from Abbotswood. And one of the people moved from Ohio said she voted, but I said, did you vote in North Carolina or Ohio? Well, she didn't remember that. And unfortunately, her Ohio license is not something that I could accept because she'd been in our state for too long. Got 90 days to take care of that problem. And she couldn't remember her social security number, which is the other way that we can. So I'm here and I'm going, all right, this is how we have to handle it, but I just don't, and that was a provisional ballot, and I just don't know whether she'll be able to get something. I said, you need to get some friend or somebody else to take you downtown, and we can cure this. But that's a long-winded answer, but that's why I'm in it, is that I enjoy the intellectual part of, okay, we've got an issue here, and, how do I solve this problem? And when I can't figure it out, I've got 4 or 5 people. So there's some people where the address they give you doesn't match what's in our computer. And then I've got a person down there who's got a bigger computer, a bigger database, who can help figure it out. So on election day, when you come, you have to be voting in your precinct, unless it's been
October 6th.
Yeah, October 6th. Right, you have to where you move to, and if it's after that time, you have to go back to your old precinct. And that's what I'm going to be doing on election day, is getting people to their right precinct. It's called the EDS person. I haven't done that job, but it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
But an important point to remember is, if you're not registered, go to early voting, because you can register during early voting.
Right. Yes, that's the other.
The ship has sailed come election day. If you're not registered, you're not voting.
Right.
Who here hasn't voted yet?
I haven't yet.
You haven't?
I went to Salisbury and took my mother.
You get extra credit.
Yeah, right.
So what are some common misconceptions about our election process that you all have run into, and how do you respond to that?
Well, one of them is that people don't trust that the machine is properly registering their vote, but there's a paper trail as well. Because when we're keeping track of the ballots, how many ballots we've handed out, that has to match exactly the number of ballots that go through that machine.
Yeah, it's this form right here that these paper forms are at a table, and the number of these paper forms has to match the number of ballots.
Right.
So basically what you're talking about is there are what you would call redundancies to make
Right.
sure.
We have to audit that at
So
the end of the
that
day.
and then if one part of the system, for whatever reason, malfunctions, there are
Yeah.
backups to mitigate
At
that.
the end of the day, we take a microchip out of the voting machine, and that has a record of all the votes that have gone in. And also, there are the paper ballots that are down in the bottom of the machine, so those can be reconciled. And if there are extra ballots in there, it'll show up on that count. There are more ballots in the machine than what we gave to voters to put in the machine. So that's something fishy going on there.
I
Well,
like,
so-
I like the word
Yeah,
that,
Rita, and then Dan.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Rita.
go
and then
ahead, go
Dan.
ahead.
I like the word you used, Stephen, redundancy. And none of us like redundancy, but that is exactly how our process is secure, is this redundancy. And I don't know if you all have come across angry voters who've come through, because they get to me, the last person in line, and I have to ask one more time, what is your name? And I have people angry with me. Well, I've already told,
There's a reason.
well, but you've not told me. But the thing is, there are people who are working. And so this chain of redundancy helps to make sure that we catch any human error that might happen prior to the submission of that ballot. And I don't want to take your time, Dan, but I want to point out, I don't know if you all have heard of Jen Easterly. She's the Director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and it's called a CISA, is how they call it. And she has been making the rounds in the news over the past week and a half to 2 weeks, and she is fascinating. And one of the things, there's so many things that are worth listening to her talk about. 97% of ballots cast in America are paper ballots. Paper ballots are the most secure. There's not one single voting machine that's connected to the internet, so they cannot be hacked. We're secure because every state runs their own elections, which again means there's not a single system that can be infiltrated or undermined. And so there's just a lot of, she is fascinating. She has a staff of one herself, paid staff, but the information that she has and has been sharing publicly the past couple of weeks is very encouraging, and it certainly silences the noise that we often hear about the lack of security of our voting process.
Well,
I'm sorry, Dan.
Yeah, one element, just from the standpoint of, like I said, the count that y'all talked about. This form right here, which is filled out, every voter that comes through, this is the form that when you come in, you give them your name, and they put your name or your name sticker on this, and then they go to the people who actually hand you your ballot. And these things are numbered. And they consecutively number them throughout the day. And, you know, the precinct where I work, we at least once an hour verify that the count matches. So that we know when that, at the end of the day, we know that the count matches. That the number
This
of
is
these.
the early voting, this is the same day voting.
Yeah.
And they're different, just so you'll see
The-
the differences.
The count of ballots matches between the number that we handed out and the number that the machine has tallied. And the other thing is, by state law, every county is required after the election to take the paper ballots, randomly pick 2 precincts and count the paper ballots in those precincts, not count them, count the votes on those paper ballots to verify that those votes match what the machine says. So that is their way of kind of randomly verifying that the machines haven't gotten, and if they ever found one that didn't match, then they would probably then escalate and go to do all their machines. But basically, they take 2 precincts, every county, every election. They compare the paper ballots to the machine ballots to make sure that the numbers match.
So I'm going to put one more comment, and then we'll take any questions that you have. So the way that this works is in this DS200, there are a bunch of cameras that can basically look at the filled-in dots. Okay, and those cameras then can then send a digital signal into the computer that again is not attached to the internet. But you can put your ballot in top side, bottom side, upside down. The ballot this time is 2 ways, so you can put it in any of those 4 ways, and it will read it. It will read it accurately. And again, that is not hooked up to the internet. What is hooked up to the internet in early voting is that our check-in computers every 30 minutes send the information that we've inputted into our computer down to Board of Elections. And Board of Elections sends back all of the information from the 28 sites that we have back to our computers, so that and you start that in the morning when you first come in, and then it happens automatically throughout the day, and then you finish the day by transferring that. And it's done by a MiFi, at least in our place. And we were on Thursday, the first Thursday, we were getting incomplete, and we were thinking, oh, they're just slammed. No, our MiFi was down. We found that out, at the end of the night. So fool me once, and now I know when it's incomplete that I gotta go check the MiFi. So that system is on the internet, but that has nothing to do with the voting per se. That is how you can vote at Lewis, which is where I'm at, and you can't, if you go up to Burmill and try to vote, we're gonna catch you because it's gone on through the system and it already says you voted. Now, even then, if you maintain that you haven't voted, we'll let you cast a provisional ballot, and then Board of Elections will sort that out, because sometimes we screw up. There's a human dimension here, and so sometimes a junior votes when a senior should have voted.
Yeah.
Okay, or it happens, and so we just tell the voter, look, it looks like you've already voted, but we've got a way to cure that. we got a fix for that, and then we don't worry about that. That gets sorted out by Board of Elections after the election, and they got 10 days. So the election ends on November 5th. They certify in this state 10 days later, and you got up to 10 days, up to the 14th at 5:30. If you cast a provisional ballot to fix it, either because you didn't have proof of your residence, you didn't have video proof. They already said you voted, you know, a myriad of different things, but Board of Elections can solve most of those things. And so, I'll just stop because there have been
Pat was
questions.
gonna say something, and then I think I saw a hand from Jim, so Pat and then Jim.
Let me insert a legal concept here as far as the security of the paper ballots is concerned. There is a chain of custody. Once we take those ballots out of the machine at the end of the night, there are 3 people at each precinct, 2 judges and a chief judge, whose responsibility it is to make sure all the ballots that were in that bin in the machine go into a box, which we mark as our precinct number, and then we seal it, and then each of those 3 judges signs across that seal, so it can't be tampered with. And then the chief judge, at the end of the night, I get to do this, drive down to the Board of Elections and physically hand over that box to the Board of Elections. So there's no opportunity for someone else to come in with a box of fake ballots. You know, it's all been inspected, 3 people have looked at it, maybe they're of different parties, they've all signed it saying, we saw that seal go on. So.
But then that is true about parties, because what I've been told at the precinct where I work is that we're all registered in different parties, that they have to have a representative from the major parties in case there's ever, and I don't know if this is, but in case there's ever a dispute or something comes up, they want people, nonpartisan resolutions.
Jeff, do you have a question?
Well, okay, so 2 questions. Number 1, have any of you had anybody just go bonkers about the picture ID thing?
No.
Everybody's pretty much accepting of that, right?
I've had people that, before picture ID was required, they still insist upon showing you their picture ID and say, this ought to be the law.
Or now that they do, says, it's about time.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So you get a lot of that, that's it.
But and there was one guy who came and said, do I really have to show a picture ID? I said, yes, sir, you do. And said, that's the law. This was passed by passed and signed into law here, and our responsibility as officials from the county board of elections is to follow the law, and that really basically ends it.
But in 5 elections that I have worked in, I've never had someone show up without an ID. So it's kind of like
my second question, I've always, all right, so I've been a resident of North Carolina. Well, Barbara and I have different reflections on that. but for about a decade, and I've been very much impressed by North Carolina's electoral process. I think it's, it is demonstrated for a very, very, very long time, consistent election integrity. But the question is, what issues have changed other than the ID thing between now and the last election? Are there other things that have been imposed that are significant?
Safeguards? Is that what you're saying? Like other safeguards that have been
Yeah, just like, yeah.
I can't think of anything. That's the major one.
Safe since I've
I
been
mean,
doing it.
now, the voting machines have changed over time. Many of you are in this room are old enough to remember the machine where you flicked the things and pulled the lever
And then you close, and then.
I will say, your millennial pastor actually does, I voted that way once.
wow, that's
No,
Yeah.
Shelter Island, my first church up in eastern Long Island.
Yeah, they still,
Yeah.
still
No, I-
has that.
But-
New York, yeah.
But what this system is, in my opinion, better than the last one we had, which also printed out a list of, people wanted to have a paper trail so that they could be audited plus a digital, and I voted in that but never had to work in that. But it was this long piece of paper that was like what you get at a store, that could get jammed and all sorts of other things, and you just had this huge, because depending, you know, in this election, I don't know, 40 contests, 50 contests, I've not counted it, but it would have been forever. And very hard to audit. This stuff goes in, and one of the other things to tell you is, so people are voting from all over the county at Lewis, right? Somebody, when they do that precinct audit, has to go through all of the boxes. I just looked it up. As of yesterday, we have had 133,000 votes cast in this county, which is pretty good. And does anybody know, I tried to look it on up, we have 450,000 voters? I don't know the answer to that.
Probably.
That's the ballpark.
They
I
were
think.
saying the first, starting on Thursday, the following Tuesday morning,
Right.
that right after it started that Tuesday morning, 20% of registered voters have already voted.
All right.
So that, that was like this past Tuesday or
And just
Tuesday.
to give you I've got an Excel spreadsheet that they update so that we know how we're doing in our own precincts. There have been 85 provisional ballots out of that 133,000, just to give you an idea that it's a relatively small number, but it's an important number, and that's what they got to go through.
Well, as long as you mention provisional ballots, when a provisional ballot is filed, the person's sitting there right in front of you. And he has to sign a document stating the reason why he's doing a provisional ballot. And then we have a process where we give him a sheet of paper with a sticker on it that he can then call into the Board of Elections to see whether his vote was accepted or rejected. So there is a follow-up process there.
We got a question from Donna, and then Gwen, and then Joyce.
I think this is a general question outside of Guilford County. And I know, I feel everybody in this room wants everybody to be able to vote. It doesn't matter. Do you know what is happening in Western North Carolina to make sure that everybody gets, how are they getting to the voters?
There has been stuff in the news where between FEMA, the North Carolina National Guard, the County Board of Elections, they are setting up precincts in tents with generators and everything all over Western North Carolina so that people can have a place to go vote.
For every precinct.
For every precinct.
I think, aren't they, and they're really emphasizing early voting to
Yeah.
get out
Yes,
there before November
right. Yes.
5th. They're
And
wanting those people.
And number two, we have a way for people, there's a provision, there's several provisions. You don't have an ID, but one of them is that you're a victim of a natural disaster, which is like, ho, 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 how's that going to happen except on the coast? Well, we got 25 counties where if somebody comes from from one of those 25 counties, that will be a provisional ballot, because we can't give them the ballot that's going to correspond to their precinct in Asheville, okay? But for the statewide elections, it's all the same. And my guess is that provisional ballot, then they figure that on out, and that gets sent to the exact precinct that corresponds with the address. Your address defines your precinct. And so that probably is, I'm sure that ultimately in the reconciliation, to get it where it needs to go, that's how that process is going to be. But we are obligated to cast provisional ballots for those folks and to let them know that the system is going to work to ensure that that vote's going to count.
I had a young lady from Asheville, and I can't tell you a story, I'd start crying. She had 6 of us crying her story, and by golly, she was going to vote whether we had to lose our jobs or not, and we would lose our jobs, I think, because of the way we let her vote, but we did. I mean, it was
Citizens arrest.
yeah. Turn me in. It's worth it.
As far as Western North Carolina, my guess is the vote totals may be lower than typical, but if it's lower, it's because of the convenience voter, not the determined voter.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
People who vote because, I can run down there and vote, or people said, by golly, I'm gonna find a way to vote. They're gonna all get to vote.
The one newscast specifically said that.
Right.
That the people, they said, people that want to vote, that have always voted, they are coming in.
Right.
And by God, they're gonna vote.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of reasons why the people of West North Carolina might have enough distractions to where that might not bubble to the top of their priorities. But they can if they are willing to go to the effort.
There was a news, also on the news, about this person that went in to vote, and they said you can't vote because you have already voted. And he said, well, I haven't voted. They said, well, do you have, like, are you a junior or a senior? And no. And there was 2 people with the same name.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in Charlotte, okay? And so I don't understand, I said, I don't understand this. When I went in there, now my name is not one that's probably gonna have any duplicates because of my first name. And they asked me my date of birth, they asked me my address, and, you know, and all this stuff. Now, they said that the first person that went in with the same name, they pulled up the second person's info. And they said, well, we have you, oh, no, my address is such and such. And they changed it all. And so I just don't understand. Didn't they give them a knife? You know, they've got a driver's license there.
Right.
It's got your date of birth on there. They asked me, what is your date of birth?
So as I said, there are human beings out there, and there are 700 people who are doing this in Guilford County in early voting, and God knows how many on election day because they're generally 2 different subsets. They're not all of us who are doing both. But the point is, when a person comes in and they're checking on in, even if I know that person, there have been several people who come from church or Moses Cone that I know. I said, I know who you are, but you have to tell me who you are. Last name first. And they roll their eyes, first name, and then I have a search function in my computer, and then I then ask the address. So that's the next fail-safe. And usually that's enough. But let's say that I don't get a hit, or that there are 50 Robert Smiths. Well, tell me your middle name. Well, now I can scroll up the list to find the middle name, and that further cuts it down. Now I can maybe find the address. But there's sometimes when you don't get a hit and the address is not there. Well, have I misspelled the name? Well, if I haven't misspelled the name, then I wipe that all out, go to the birth date, and then I can go on down and search all the people with that birth date, and usually find. Usually what it is, it's a hyphenated name. And it either was supposed to have a hyphen and it didn't get a hyphen when it got put in, or there's a space there, or they're just catenated together. But so, like I said, it's problem solving. It's having to sort of think through this, and it just happens that that's what the professional ballot does. Okay, so that person who did not vote, that's going to go on down. They're going to be able to look at signatures and be able to match those 2 together. That's the detective work, and they've got 10 days to do that. And I don't think that they probably sleep. I mean, I think that's. But again, we're talking about 80 sort of ballots here, out of 130,000. So, fortunately, the number is not huge, and we try to. But that's what the board of elections has to go through that, and that's how that gets sorted out.
And some of those will end up being counted.
Yes.
They will resolve it and count it.
Right.
Ellen?
Does that answer your question?
I was,
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Joyce and then Ellen.
Okay. I just want to know, why is there so much misinformation about your work? And people feel like their votes will not, they will be tampered with.
Good question.
Well, first of all, there's several nations in this world that want to interfere with our elections. And it's easy to plant misinformation on TikTok or whatever social media you want to use. There have been stories in the national news that both Russia and China have been determined that they are planting misinformation.
And Iran.
yes,
Iran.
yes,
Right.
those are the 3,
Iran.
Russia,
Yeah.
China, and Iran.
So there's that. Then there's domestic folks that want to discourage the other side from voting. So there's been examples in the past where mailings have gone out saying the election date is on the 7th, not the 5th, and so there's all sorts of skullduggery trying to.
And that's not new. That part is not new.
Right.
It'd be worse than Sunday.
part of
Okay,
it,
a follow-up on that. Have you ever feared doing your job?
I appreciate you asking that, because that was gonna be my question.
No.
The one time I came closest to being afraid, there was a gentleman, there's a 50-foot parameter around the outside of the polling place where you cannot electioneer. These folks that are coming up and trying to hand out literature. This fellow refused to not do that in this boundary zone. So I went out and explained to him that he couldn't do what he's doing, and he refused to accept my word. So I got on the phone, we called the Board of Elections, he spoke directly with the Board of Directions, and they said, that is the case, you can't do that. So he got pretty heated about it, but at the end of the day, he stood back behind the line, and then soon after that, he left the precinct. So.
And we do our best. I mean, the next step beyond that, if that had failed, would have been to call the police. But the last thing we want outside of our polling place is a police car.
Right.
that is absolutely the last thing. So we hope we can persuade that, and we have observers there, and the observers, for the most part, I feel have helped us, have seen things and been able to call our attention to it, and I appreciate them, and I let them know that, and then you can deal with it, because most people are not deliberately trying to violate what's going on.
I could tell you,
I
I
found
called the sheriff twice and the wife once.
The wife was what?
Good wife.
The wife came and got him.
Oh, that was brilliant.
Ellen and then Anthony.
I'm sorry, I was giving someone a ride home, so that's why I was coming late. But when I came in, we were seemed to be talking about Helene and voter accommodations. And I just wanted to, so you might have covered this, but I did just want to throw out, I don't know if you go on the website much for the state NCSB's, North Carolina State Board of Elections, or the Guilford County Board of Elections. You can go on these websites all the time under the League of Women Voters, and there's such a resource. But I'm just saying, if you're really concerned about Helene and this stuff, you can go on the State Board of Elections website, ncsbe.gov, and then /Helene, and it lists the accommodations that they are making for these guys. So if you really got questions about what they're doing, go on that website and see what they say. And then the other thing I was just going to say, for any kind of questions, you can go on our Guilford County Board of Elections or call them. They're just they're great people. If you've got anything, believe me, they want to know what people are thinking. So if that hadn't been brought out, what a resource these two are. Please don't hesitate to just start with the website first and then follow up with a call. I just wanted to say that. But /Helene for the state, they tell you what accommodations they're making for those.
Anthony, you have something?
Yes. What are the qualifications for people, I guess you call them observers? What are their qualifications, and how many observers can you have watching what you do? Because, it seems like, in the last election, they were talking about, we're going to have so many people there. There was some controversy about, them being there and kind of more or less being a disruption,
right?
Rather than.
So, at least in early voting, there can be one person from each of the major parties that's assigned to my place, Lewis Recreation. And then there can be 3 at-large people from each of the parties, so there could be a total of 8. Okay. And then each of the other parties, the Green Party, Libertarian, Conservative, there are 9 different parties, they all could have people. But I can tell you that usually when there are 2 folks there and somebody else comes in, they don't want to be crowded. Our room is only so big. And most of the people have been more than happy when there is one observer and they just check with the observer from their party. But they sign up with their party, and then we get a text message into our site phone with a list of all the people, and it takes forever to boot, but then when people come in, they are supposed to check in with me as site supervisor, and I verify their name and how long they're gonna be there, and show them where I prefer them to sit. If there's another place that they want to sit, which one guy wanted to do, I just said, well, you can sit here, but you have to sit in front, so you can't be looking at our computers.
Okay.
And so, and I let them know, look, you can also move around the room, but if you decide you want to move around the room, you come to me, okay? I had one other lady who just had some questions and concerns, and she started talking to the person who was putting who was supposed to monitor the ballots, and she went and got her book and started to answer the question, and she's walking away from her machine, and I happened to see that, and I went, and said, go back to your machine, and then talk to the poll observer and said, look, you got questions, that's my responsibility. She's got one job, and that job is to monitor who's putting ballots in that machine. And so, you know, most people, when you do this, and she immediately, you know, stood down, and I said, if you got a question, I'm here. That's what I'm supposed to do, among other things. But most of it is trying to keep order in the room. And in my room, it's not a gym. One of the places I work at Griffin is a gymnasium, and it's perfect because the voters are sitting out in the hall, then they're walking down through the gym to the check-in table, and they keep walking onto the ballot table, and then they go down the backside of the gym, and that's where the voting machines are, the voting enclosures are, and then the DS200, which is the voting machine, as they exit. And so it's a beautiful, nothing's crossing. At my place in Lewis, the ballot table is here. I'm sorry, the check-in is here, the help table is here, which is where I sit. The ballot table is across the hall, or across the room, and the enclosures are in the back of the room, and then those lines have to cross. That the people with their ballots and the people who are getting their ballots have to cross, and when that line gets too long, I just have to stop the number of people coming in the room. And sometimes, yes, I get the stink eye because they've been waiting for a while. I'm just saying, look, we can't have this cross. And so when you can see the DS2 and I can see the DS200, then we can start admitting people on in. And just sort of like a rheostat, just controlling the flow of people. And that's my responsibility.
My concern is intimidation. You know, that's been a big concern.
I have not seen that.
Okay.
Perfect. Period.
And they are specifically instructed they can't interfere with what's going on.
And if I saw that, I'd be talking to somebody.
There's every official, when they go to training, receives a book like this. And there's a page for that, observers and runners, and there's a list of what observers may not do. And on many of these is interfere with the voting process, or try to look over somebody's shoulder while they're voting, or ask them questions. They are observers, they're not questioners. So
They're not supposed to be talking to them.
We have about 6 minutes left. Gwen and then Laura has something she wanted to add.
Well, you heard about well, maybe you didn't hear about the guy that was wearing the MAGA hat and they told him to take it off and he punched the voter.
Where was this?
Texas.
I think it was Texas.
Oh, okay, I was thinking it's
No,
not
no,
Guilford
no.
County.
But in North Carolina, we voted at the primary, my husband and I, and we vote at Lake Branch, there's a church there, the Baptist, Methodist, I don't know, it's a church. We voted at the primary, okay? Forgive me, I'm a Democrat, okay? My neighbor is a Republican, and he screamed across the hallway, don't let them in, they're communists and they're gonna vote for that communist. Yes, that happened. And nothing happened to him. My husband went out and told him and said, don't you ever do that again, or I'll have you arrested.
Well, again, that's up to...
That's not acceptable.
That's not acceptable, and were I to hear that, which I have not heard, I'd be walking right up to the person and said, are you here to vote? And if you're here to vote, come on in, this is the process, and I don't want to hear anything else from you while you're here.
Yeah, I mean...
And so, we have ways to control, I can't control what first comes out of the mouth, but that's our responsibility. Our responsibility is to be Switzerland, but also to maintain an orderly movement through. And again, Jim and Rita have been in the room, so you will know what problems we faced there in terms of it, the configuration. Yeah.
In North Carolina, though, there's no barring someone from coming in wearing a political shirt.
Right.
To quote Charlie Callicutt, who's the director of elections here in Guilford County, don't make them strip coming into your polling place or take off their hat. That's acceptable. What is not acceptable is they come in and say, vote for X.
Yeah, they can't electioneer.
You can't. It's my job to then go up to them and say,
And we
"You need
can't
to
wear a
vote
MAGA
or
hat.
go."
Right.
Or any hat,
Right.
yes,
And
or any
nothing
political.
A couple quick questions, and then we're going to formally bring our time to our close, because I have swimming lessons for my kids, you can hear about 5-2 minutes. But we'll, if y'all want to stick around for a little bit, we can. So real quick, if we can do a lightning round.
I just want to respond to Joyce as how this information is getting, and we've all heard the text from Guilford County. They never send a text out, mass voting. I've gotten 3 of them, I have made copies sent. The one that was the most disturbing was saying that I had not voted and had a picture of Lewis Recreation Center in the text with a car in front of it. And they're not true. They don't do that. But that's how they're getting people, even in Guilford County.
John, did you ever?
Well, just real quick, it's even harder than I kind of knew it was to vote. You got to have all the bona fides and everything. So I just came up with this like a few days ago. So all these illegal people who are voting, coming into the country that everybody's worried about, why aren't they worried that they're going to vote Republican? I mean, are they all going to vote Democratic? They got to get some of them, right?
First of all, they're not voting.
It's a felony.
No, that was all tongue in cheek. I can't imagine how they would get a vote, especially if they went to Bill Hickman's precinct.
And if they do manage to vote, it's a felony.
Right.
It's a felony.
It's a felony, and being a felony, if they are not citizens, they aren't going to become citizens. I mean, it is about the dumbest thing that you can do if you want to become a citizen, because we will find you. And again, something will have broken on down in terms of the ID and the residence in terms of that. And you have to sign it. There are 5 eligibility criteria. One of them, I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm a citizen of Guilford County for more than 30 days. I'm over 18. I realize that it's a felony to vote more than once in an election, and I've not committed a felony. You have to sign that. And if you sign that, and you're not a citizen of the United States, you have committed a felony.
So you have to give either your last 4 digits of your social security
Yeah.
or your driver's license. So that's another thing. I mean, that's.
Well, and something that we have to remind ourselves of is that this noise that we're hearing about illegals voting, about hacking, about all of these things, as Pat mentioned, and we've corroborated that we do know that there are outside entities that are trying to interfere with us. If you hear something that is outrageous, it is. And that's
Good rule of thumb.
but that's the point. When you have these other entities trying to make noise and distract us from doing our civic duty, they're doing it trying to appeal to your emotions, and the strongest emotion is that of rage
Or fear.
and if they can, or fear, and if they can make you afraid or make you mad, they've achieved their goal. They've done what they set out to do. We're smarter than that. We just have to remember that, oh, they're trying to manipulate me. Our elections are safe, they are secure, our Constitution is intact, and there are many stopgaps along the way to make sure everything is legitimate and that your vote absolutely counts. And that's what you have to remind yourself when you hear this noise, is that's all it is. It's just noise.
But unfortunately, people are very gullible.
And they are, and that's where we can be influential.
And they fear and they believe.
And that's what they're preying on, is that, and that's our
and
job.
That's what's happening.
But that our job as friends, as community members, as citizens.
You're talking normal, but these people don't hear you. They don't hear you.
We're going to give Laura the final word here. And then I'm going to close this in prayer, but if any of y'all want to hang around for a few more minutes and ask our guests, we can. Laura, would you give us a final word here?
Two things. If you are not registered with a major party, you are unaffiliated. You are not an independent. You are unaffiliated. We used to have an independent party, and sometimes throughout history, it has come and gone. You are unaffiliated. In the primary, you get to pick your ballot. And we couldn't tell you that, but now we can, as of about 8 years ago. So you get to pick your ballot. The other thing, and I've been through this with members of my family, fraud. There is rampant, and I mean rampant, campaign fraud. These people lie to us, they misuse our money, they're surrogates, their campaigns. They commit fraud every time they open their mouth sometimes. Rampant campaign fraud. And they tell us they're going to do things that's not in the power of that office to do. So, rampant campaign fraud. Election fraud, there's some. You have some boards of elections in different states that are doing things that make it harder to vote. And there's some election fraud. To me, gerrymandering is election. Suppression of voting rights. There's election fraud. People, there ain't no voter fraud. And it's because you vote where you live, and when you come in a polling place, most likely somebody's going to say, "Hey Tim, how you doing?" You know, people know each other in their home. Even for early voting, I know most of the people that come in there to vote. In front of me in that computer, I can go back to your original application registration to vote. I've got a lot of information in there. So when you come in, I can see a lot that will tell me if you're who you say you are. There's no voter fraud. And when I hear it after 28 years of working polls, it offends me. And that's why I get so angry. There's just not voter fraud. I have turned in one person that I know committed voter fraud, and I turned him in. I don't know what happened, but I knew standing in front of me, and that little pink piece of paper that says it's a felony to sign that paper if it ain't true, I took it and I slid it in front of him and I patted it, and as soon as he took that ballot or the ATV and went to vote, I called downtown and I said, "This is his number, this is his name, it shouldn't count." So we ain't stupid.
And you don't have a vote. And you don't have a vote.
I don't have a vote.
No vote. Yeah. Folks, thank you all so much. I hope you all will join me in thanking these civic servants here. And just in all things, let's be truth tellers. And I'm very grateful for you all sharing that truth with us. So Phil, Dan, Debbie, Rita, Pat, Laura, thank you all so very much. I'm going to pray us out. Yes. I'm going to pray us out, and I'm sure that they would be happy to answer any other questions you have. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. We pray for the information that was shared here. We know that there is so much noise out there, and we are so grateful for the neighbors among us who are doing their jobs to help protect democracy and to protect our sacred right to vote. We continue to pray for peace in the coming weeks and ask in all things that we would be neighborly towards one another as your Son Jesus Christ models for us. This we pray in the name of your resurrected Son Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. All right, thank you all so very, very, very much.
Did anybody want to copy this articles in today's paper?
I'm just